The frozen wind bit through Rebecca Palmer's threadbare coat as she stood beside her crippled wagon, staring at the shattered wheel with a sinking heart that matched the gray December sky overhead. It was 1876, and winter had arrived early in Northern California, transforming the rutted trail between Sacramento and Redding into a treacherous ribbon of ice and frozen mud. She had been foolish to attempt this journey alone, but desperation had a way of making even the most cautious person reckless. Her father lay dying in Redding, and no amount of common sense could have kept her from trying to reach him before the end. The wagon wheel had given out 3 miles back, the aging wood finally surrendering to the combination of cold and rough terrain. Rebecca had managed to coax the limping vehicle another half-mile before it became clear that continuing was impossible. Now she stood in the middle of nowhere, with darkness approaching and the temperature dropping by the minute. The horse stamped nervously, its breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. She reached up to stroke its neck, murmuring words of comfort she did not feel herself. "Easy there, Molly," she whispered, her voice carrying across the empty landscape. "We will figure something out." But even as she spoke, Rebecca knew the truth. She had no tools capable of repairing the wheel, no spare parts, and no real knowledge of how to fix such a thing even if she had possessed the proper equipment. Her hands were already numb despite her worn gloves, and she could feel the cold seeping through her boots. If night fell before she found help, she would be in serious trouble. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her spin around, hope and fear warring in her chest. A lone rider emerged from the bend in the trail, sitting tall in his saddle despite the bitter cold. As he drew closer, Rebecca could make out more details. He was a young man, perhaps in his mid-20s, with dark hair visible beneath his weathered hat and a heavy coat that had seen better days. His horse was a sturdy bay gelding, well cared for despite the rough conditions. The rider slowed as he approached, his eyes taking in the broken wagon and Rebecca's obvious distress. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting, his expression a mixture of concern and politeness that immediately put her somewhat at ease. "Afternoon, miss," he said, his voice deep and warm despite the cold. "Looks like you have run into some trouble." Rebecca nodded, tucking a strand of dark blonde hair back under her bonnet with stiff fingers. "My wheel gave out. I was trying to make it to Redding before nightfall, but I suppose that is not going to happen now." The man dismounted in one smooth motion, moving closer to inspect the damaged wheel. He crouched down beside it, running his hands over the splintered wood with practiced ease. Rebecca found herself studying him as he worked, noting the capable way he examined the damage and the lack of judgment in his demeanor. Too many men would have taken the opportunity to lecture her about traveling alone, but this stranger seemed focused solely on the problem at hand. "Patrick Irving," he said, glancing up at her with eyes the color of rich coffee. "I've got a small ranch about 2 miles east of here. I was heading into town for supplies when I spotted your wagon." "Rebecca Palmer," she replied, grateful that her voice remained steady. "I appreciate you stopping. I know I am in quite a predicament." Patrick stood, brushing frost from his knees as he studied the wheel more carefully. "The axle is intact, which is good news. The wheel itself is beyond repair, but I have got a spare back at my place that should fit. The real problem is getting your wagon there without causing more damage." Relief flooded through Rebecca, so intense it made her knees weak. "You would help me? Truly?" Something flickered in Patrick's expression, a softness that contrasted with his weathered appearance. "Cannot leave a lady stranded in weather like this. My mother would rise from her grave to haunt me if I did something so ungentlemanly." Despite her dire circumstances, Rebecca felt a small smile tug at her lips. Well, we certainly cannot have that. What do you suggest? Patrick moved to his horse, retrieving a length of sturdy rope from his saddlebag. I will tie your wagon to mine and lead your horse alongside. It will be slow going, but we should make it before full dark. Once we get you to the ranch, I can fix that wheel properly and you can continue on to Redding in the morning. I cannot impose on you like that, Rebecca protested, even though she knew she had no real alternative. You have already been so kind. It is not an imposition, Patrick said firmly, already beginning to secure the rope. Besides, my sister lives with me. She will be glad for the female company. We do not get many visitors out this way, especially not in winter. The mention of a sister eased some of Rebecca's concern about the propriety of the situation. She watched as Patrick worked, his movements efficient and confident. There was something inherently trustworthy about him, a solidity that made her feel safe despite their brief acquaintance. She had always prided herself on being a good judge of character, and everything about Patrick Irving suggested he was exactly what he appeared to be, an honest man offering help to someone in need. The journey to Patrick's ranch took nearly an hour, with darkness falling around them like a heavy curtain. Rebecca walked alongside her horse, leading Molly while Patrick guided his own mount and carefully pulled the damaged wagon. The cold was brutal, seeping through every layer of clothing and settling deep in her bones. By the time the ranch house came into view, she could barely feel her feet. The house was modest but well-maintained, a sturdy wooden structure with smoke rising from the chimney in a welcoming plume. A barn stood nearby, along with a few smaller outbuildings that spoke of a working ranch. Light glowed in the windows, warm and inviting against the frozen landscape. Before they could reach the house, the front door swung open and a young woman appeared, wrapped in a thick shawl. She was perhaps 20 years old, with the same dark hair as Patrick and a face full of concern. "Patrick, I was starting to worry. You have been gone so long and the weather is getting worse." She paused, noticing Rebecca for the first time. "Oh, you have brought company." "This is Miss Rebecca Palmer," Patrick explained, helping Rebecca down from beside the wagon. "Her wheel broke on the trail to Redding. Rebecca, this is my sister Sarah." Sarah hurried forward, her expression immediately sympathetic. "You poor thing, you must be frozen through. Come inside at once. Patrick can tend to the horses and wagon." Rebecca wanted to protest, to insist on helping, but the truth was she could barely stand. Sarah took her arm with gentle firmness, guiding her toward the house while Patrick began unhitching the horses. The warmth of the house hit Rebecca like a physical force as she stepped inside, so intense it was almost painful against her frozen skin. The interior was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and curtains that showed a woman's touch. A fire crackled merrily in the stone fireplace, and the smell of something savory cooking filled the air. Sarah led Rebecca to a chair near the fire, immediately setting about removing her frozen gloves and coat. "How long were you out there?" Sarah asked, her voice full of concern as she examined Rebecca's reddened hands. "Several hours," Rebecca admitted, flexing her fingers and wincing at the pins and needles sensation. "I should have turned back when the wheel started making noise, but I kept hoping I could make it to Redding." "Why the hurry, if you do not mind me asking?" Sarah draped Rebecca's coat over another chair to dry, then poured her a cup of hot tea from a pot on the stove. Rebecca wrapped her hands around the cup, savoring the warmth. "My father is very ill. A neighbor sent word that I should come quickly if I wanted to see him one last time. I left Sacramento as soon as I got the message." Sarah's expression softened with understanding. "I am so sorry. Losing a parent is never easy. Our own mother passed 2 years ago, and our father 5 years before that. It is just Patrick and me now." "Then I am doubly grateful for your hospitality," Rebecca said quietly. "Not everyone would open their home to a stranger, especially one who has disrupted their evening." "Nonsense," Sarah said warmly. "Patrick would never leave someone in need, and neither would I. Besides, it is nice to have another woman to talk to. I love my brother dearly, but sometimes I crave female conversation." The door opened again, bringing a gust of cold air and Patrick himself. He had removed his heavy coat but still looked chilled, his cheeks red from the cold. He moved immediately to the fire, holding his hands out to the flames. "Horses are fed and settled," he reported. "I put your mare in the barn with mine. She seemed grateful for the warmth." "Thank you," Rebecca said, meaning it with all her heart. "You have been incredibly kind." Patrick shrugged, seeming almost uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. "You would be surprised," Rebecca said quietly, thinking of the times she had witnessed people turning away from those in need. "Not everyone has such a generous spirit." Something passed between them then, a moment of connection that made Rebecca's breath catch. Patrick held her gaze for a long moment before Sarah broke the spell by announcing that dinner would be ready soon. The meal was simple but delicious: venison stew with vegetables and fresh bread that Sarah had baked that morning. As they ate, conversation flowed easily. Sarah asked about Sacramento, eager to hear about city life, while Patrick mostly listened, occasionally adding a comment or question. Rebecca found herself relaxing in their company, the warmth and food and friendly atmosphere working together to ease the tension that had gripped her since the wheel broke. "How long have you had the ranch?" Rebecca asked, genuinely curious about their lives. "Our father started it about 15 years ago," Patrick explained, tearing off a piece of bread. "It was not much at first, just a small herd of cattle and some dreams. He built it up over the years, and when he passed, I took over. We have got about 50 head now, plus some chickens and a vegetable garden that Sarah manages. Do not forget the pigs," Sarah added with a smile. "They are ornery creatures, but good for trading." "It sounds like a good life," Rebecca said, and she meant it. There was something appealing about the simplicity of it, the connection to the land and the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. "It has its challenges," Patrick admitted, "especially in winter, but it is ours, and there is value in that." After dinner, Sarah showed Rebecca to a small guest room at the back of the house. It was sparsely furnished but clean, with a comfortable-looking bed and a window that overlooked the dark fields. "I am sorry it is not much," Sarah said, lighting a lamp on the bedside table. "It is perfect," Rebecca assured her, "more than I could have hoped for this evening." Sarah smiled, then hesitated as if wanting to say something more. Finally, she spoke. "My brother is a good man, one of the best I know. He works himself to the bone keeping this ranch running, and he always puts others before himself. I am glad you crossed paths today." Rebecca was not entirely sure how to respond to that, so she simply nodded. Sarah bid her good night and left, closing the door softly behind her. Alone for the first time since her rescue, Rebecca sank onto the bed and allowed herself to fully process the day. She had been so close to disaster, to freezing on that lonely trail with no one to help her. The fact that Patrick had come along when he did felt like more than coincidence. She thought about his quiet competence, the way he had assessed the situation and immediately taken action. There had been no hesitation, no expectation of thanks or reward. He had simply done what needed to be done because it was right. In her experience, such men were rare. Sleep came quickly despite her worries about her father. The warm bed and physical exhaustion from the day combined to pull her under, and she dreamed of nothing at all. Morning came with pale sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Rebecca dressed quickly, braiding her hair and making herself as presentable as possible. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Patrick already outside and Sarah preparing breakfast. "Good morning," Sarah greeted her cheerfully. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Rebecca admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality." "Patrick has been up since before dawn working on your wheel," Sarah said, setting plates on the table. "He should be finished soon." Rebecca moved to the window, looking out toward the barn. She could see Patrick's figure moving around the wagon, his breath visible in the cold morning air. Something in her chest tightened at the sight, a feeling she could not quite name. "Your brother is very dedicated," she said softly. "He is," Sarah agreed, coming to stand beside her. "But he works too hard sometimes. He has not taken a day for himself since I can remember. The ranch is his whole life." There was something wistful in Sarah's tone that made Rebecca glance at her. "You think he should find other interests?" "I think he should find happiness," Sarah said simply. "The ranch provides a living, but it is not the same as having someone to share your life with. He had a girl once, about 3 years ago. Mary Henderson from town, but she wanted a husband who would move to Sacramento, start a business there. Patrick could not leave the ranch, not with our father's legacy and our livelihood tied to it. She married someone else." Rebecca felt an unexpected pang at this revelation. "That must have been difficult for him." "It was," Sarah said quietly. "He does not talk about it, but I know it hurt. He has kept to himself since then, focused only on work. I worry about him sometimes." Before Rebecca could respond, the front door opened and Patrick stepped inside, bringing cold air and the smell of wood smoke with him. His eyes went immediately to Rebecca, and he offered a small smile. "Morning," he said. "Wheel is fixed and ready to go. I tested it pretty thoroughly, should hold just fine for the rest of your journey." "All ready." Rebecca felt a strange disappointment. Of course she needed to get to Redding to see her father, but she found herself reluctant to leave this warm house and these kind people. "The spare wheel was a good match," Patrick explained. "Did not take as long as I expected. I can help you hitch up after breakfast, and you should be on your way." They ate together again, the conversation more subdued than the night before. Rebecca could not shake the feeling that something important was slipping away, though she could not articulate exactly what. Patrick seemed quieter too, focusing on his food and offering only brief responses to Sarah's attempts at conversation. After breakfast, Rebecca helped Sarah clean up while Patrick went to prepare the wagon. When everything was ready, Rebecca bundled into her coat and stepped outside into the bright, cold morning. The wagon stood waiting, looking sturdy and road-worthy with its new wheel. "I cannot thank you enough," Rebecca said, turning to face Patrick and Sarah. "You saved my life, truly. If there is anything I can do to repay your kindness—" "No repayment needed," Patrick said, his expression serious. "Just promise me you will drive carefully. The trail can be treacherous this time of year." "I promise," Rebecca said. She hesitated, then pulled out the small amount of money she had brought for the journey. "Please, at least let me pay you for the wheel and your time." Patrick shook his head firmly. "Keep your money. You will need it in Redding for your father's care or whatever else comes up. The wheel was a spare, and my time was freely given." Rebecca wanted to argue, but something in his expression told her it would be useless. Instead, she tucked the money away and moved to embrace Sarah, who hugged her tightly. "Take care of yourself," Sarah whispered. "And if you ever find yourself back this way, please stop and visit." "I will," Rebecca promised. She turned to Patrick, extending her hand. He took it, his grip warm and strong despite the cold. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither of them moved. "Thank you, Patrick," Rebecca said softly. "For everything." "You are welcome," he replied, his voice low. He seemed to want to say something more, his mouth opening and then closing again. Finally, he simply squeezed her hand once more and released it. Rebecca climbed onto the wagon seat, gathering the reins with hands that trembled slightly. Molly seemed rested and ready, stamping her hooves eagerly. With a final wave to Patrick and Sarah, Rebecca urged the horse forward and began the journey toward Reading. She had only gone about 100 yards when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Turning, she saw Patrick riding toward her on his bay gelding. He pulled up alongside the wagon, his expression conflicted. "I have been thinking," he said without preamble. "The trail to Reading is rough, especially after the freeze we have had. I have got business in town anyway, supplies I need to pick up. Would you mind if I rode along, just to make sure you get there safely?" Rebecca's heart leaped, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. "I would not want to take you away from your work." "Work will wait," Patrick said firmly. "Your safety is more important." They traveled together through the morning, the wagon creaking steadily along the frozen trail while Patrick rode beside it. At first they spoke little, but gradually conversation began to flow. Patrick told her about the ranch, the challenges of the winter and his hopes for the spring. Rebecca spoke of her life in Sacramento, her work as a seamstress, and her complicated relationship with her father. "We were never close," she admitted, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "He was always disappointed that I was not a son. After my mother died when I was 12, he became even more distant, but he is still my father. I cannot let him die alone." "Family is complicated," Patrick said quietly. "But you are doing the right thing making this journey. Whatever happens, you will not have to live with regret." They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat the lunch Sarah had packed for them. Sitting on a fallen log beside the trail, sharing bread and cheese, Rebecca felt a contentment she had not experienced in years. There was something about Patrick's steady presence that made her feel safe, understood in a way she rarely felt with others. "Can I ask you something?" Patrick said suddenly, his eyes on the horizon. "Of course." "What will you do after? After you have seen your father, I mean, will you go back to Sacramento?" Rebecca considered the question. "I suppose so. My work is there, my rooms. I do not have much, but it is my life." Patrick nodded slowly. "Do you like it? The city, the life you have there?" "I never really thought about whether I like it," Rebecca said honestly. "It is just what I have always known. My mother moved us there when I was young, after my father started drinking heavily. She wanted to get away from him to give me a better life. After she died, I stayed because I did not know what else to do." "There are other options," Patrick said carefully. "Other ways to live, like ranching." Rebecca smiled slightly. "I do not know the first thing about cattle or farming." "You could learn," Patrick said, then seemed to catch himself. "I am sorry. That was presumptuous of me. I have no right to suggest what you should do with your life." "It is not presumptuous," Rebecca said softly. "It is kind. You are trying to help me see possibilities I have not considered." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence, full of unspoken thoughts and growing feelings neither quite knew how to address. Reading came into view in the late afternoon, a small but bustling town nestled in the valley. The sight of it made Rebecca's stomach clench with anxiety. Somewhere in those buildings her father lay dying, and she would have to face him and all the complicated emotions that entailed. Patrick seemed to sense her distress. "You know where to find him." The neighbor's letter said he was staying at the boarding house on Main Street. "Mrs. Carmichael's place." "I know it," Patrick said. "I will take you there." Mrs. Carmichael was a plump, kind-faced woman in her 50s who greeted them at the door of the boarding house with obvious relief. "Miss Palmer? Oh, thank goodness you made it. Your father has been asking for you." "How is he?" Rebecca asked, her voice tight. Mrs. Carmichael's expression was answer enough. Not well, I am afraid. The doctor has been to see him, says it is his liver, among other things. The drinking finally caught up with him. He has maybe a few days, perhaps less. Rebecca nodded, fighting back the complicated tangle of emotions. Grief, anger, regret, all mixing together until she could barely breathe. She felt Patrick's hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring. "You want me to come up with you?" he asked quietly. Rebecca wanted to say yes, wanted his presence more than she could express, but this was something she needed to do alone. "Thank you, but I should see him by myself. Will you be in town long?" "I will get my supplies and then find a room for the night at the hotel," Patrick said. "I will be around if you need me." Mrs. Carmichael led Rebecca up a narrow staircase to a small room at the back of the second floor. She knocked softly before opening the door, revealing a sparse room with a single bed. In it lay a man Rebecca barely recognized. William Palmer had always been a large man, broad and imposing even in his drunkenness. The figure in the bed was a shadow of that, wasted away until he looked like a skeleton with skin stretched over it. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and labored. "William, Mrs. Carmichael said gently, "Your daughter is here." The old man's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first before landing on Rebecca. Something flickered in their depths, an emotion she could not quite read. "Rebecca," he rasped, his voice barely audible, "you came." "Of course I came," she said, moving to sit in the chair beside the bed. Mrs. Carmichael quietly excused herself, leaving them alone. For a long moment, father and daughter simply looked at each other, years of hurt and distance hanging between them like a physical barrier. Finally, William spoke again. "I was not a good father to you." The simple statement, so baldly honest, took Rebecca by surprise. "No," she agreed quietly, "you were not. Your mother deserved better. You deserved better." He paused, gathering strength. "I was angry at the world, at life, at myself. The drinking was easier than facing what I had become. By the time I realized what I had lost, it was too late." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "Why did you ask for me now, after all these years of silence?" "Because I am dying," William said bluntly. "And I did not want to go without trying to make some kind of peace. I do not expect forgiveness. I have no right to it. But I wanted you to know that my failures were mine alone. They were never because you were not enough. You were always more than I deserved." The tears fell then, hot against her cold cheeks. "I spent so many years thinking I was the problem, that if I had been different, better, you might have loved me." "Oh, child," William whispered, and his own eyes were wet. "I did love you. I do love you. I just never knew how to show it. The alcohol took everything good in me and left only bitterness. But you survived. You built a life despite me, not because of me. That takes strength I never had." They talked for hours as the winter light faded outside the window. William told her about his own childhood, the pain he had carried, the mistakes he had made. He did not make excuses, but he gave context, helping Rebecca understand the broken man he had been. In turn, she told him about her life in Sacramento, the friends she had made, the small joys she had found. When exhaustion finally overtook him, Rebecca stood to leave. William caught her hand with surprising strength. "Will you come back tomorrow?" he asked, and there was fear in his voice, the fear of dying alone. "I will be here," Rebecca promised. "I will stay as long as you need me." She left the boarding house as evening settled over Reading, feeling emotionally wrung out, but somehow lighter than she had in years. The conversation had not erased the past or healed all wounds, but it had opened a door to understanding that she had thought forever closed. Patrick was waiting outside, leaning against a post with his hands in his pockets. He straightened when he saw her, his eyes searching her face. "How was it?" he asked gently. "Difficult," Rebecca said honestly, "but necessary. He apologized. We talked." It does not fix everything, but it is something. Patrick nodded, then hesitated. I found rooms at the hotel. They had 2 available if you need a place to stay. The offer was carefully worded, respectful of propriety while making clear he wanted to help. Rebecca felt something warm unfold in her chest. That would be wonderful. Thank you. They walked to the hotel together through the darkening streets. Patrick carried her small bag and they spoke little, but his presence was comforting. At the hotel, he arranged for the rooms and saw her settled before bidding her good night. "If you need anything," he said, standing in the hallway outside her door, "I am right next door. Do not hesitate to knock." "Patrick," Rebecca said, stopping him as he turned to go. "Why are you doing all this? You have already done so much, more than anyone could reasonably expect. Why are you still here?" He was quiet for a long moment, and in the lamplight of the hallway his expression was open and honest. "Because I cannot seem to make myself leave. Because from the moment I saw you standing beside that broken wagon, something in me recognized something in you. I cannot explain it better than that." Rebecca's breath caught. "I feel it too," she whispered. "This connection, it is like nothing I have ever experienced." Patrick stepped closer, his eyes intense. "I know we have only just met. I know this is fast and probably foolish. But I have learned that life is short and uncertain. If you feel something real, you should not ignore it." "What are you saying?" Rebecca asked, though her heart already knew. "I am saying that I want to know you better. I want to spend time with you to learn everything about you. I want to see where this feeling leads." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "If that is something you might want too." Rebecca felt a smile spread across her face, genuine and bright despite the difficult day. "Yes, that is definitely something I want." The next week passed in a strange mixture of sorrow and joy. Rebecca spent her days at her father's bedside, talking with him, reading to him, and slowly building the relationship they had never had. William Palmer grew weaker each day, but there was peace in his eyes that had not been there before. He died quietly on the 7th day, with Rebecca holding his hand and whispering that she forgave him. Through it all, Patrick was there. He did not intrude on her time with her father, but he was always nearby when she needed him. In the evenings after leaving the boarding house, Rebecca would find him waiting. They would walk through Reading together, talking about everything and nothing. They shared meals at the hotel restaurant, took a buggy ride to see the winter landscape, and slowly, carefully fell in love. Patrick told her about his dreams for the ranch, the improvements he wanted to make, the legacy he hoped to leave. Rebecca shared her fears and hopes, her complicated feelings about her father's death, her uncertainty about the future. With each conversation, each shared moment, the bond between them grew stronger. The funeral was a small affair. William Palmer had few friends left after years of drinking and isolation, but Mrs. Carmichael came, as did a handful of other boarding house residents. Patrick stood beside Rebecca throughout the service, his presence a steady anchor. When it was over and William was laid to rest in the Reading cemetery, Rebecca felt a chapter of her life closing. "What will you do now?" Patrick asked as they walked back toward town. "Will you return to Sacramento?" Rebecca stopped walking, turning to face him fully. The question she had been avoiding had finally arrived, and she knew her answer would change everything. "I do not want to go back," she said quietly. "Sacramento was never really my home. It was just where I ended up. But these past days with you, I have felt more alive, more myself than I ever did there." Hope flickered in Patrick's eyes. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I want to stay, if you want me to, if there is room in your life for me." Patrick closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, taking her hands in his. They stood in the middle of the street, obvious to anyone passing by, and he looked at her with such intensity it made her breathless. "I fixed your wagon wheel," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I would like to try fixing something else if you will let me." "What is that?" Rebecca whispered, though she thought she knew. "The parts of you that are broken. The lonely places, the hurt places. I want to help heal them, the way you have already started healing mine. I want to build a life with you, Rebecca. A real life, full of love and purpose and all the things neither of us has had enough of." Tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I want that too, more than anything." Patrick pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her and holding her like she was something precious. Rebecca rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart, and felt like she had finally come home. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Reading. Sarah served as Rebecca's witness, barely able to contain her joy at gaining a sister. The minister who performed the ceremony commented on how right they looked together, how clearly they belonged to each other. The journey back to the ranch as husband and wife was nothing like Rebecca's desperate flight to Reading had been. The winter had deepened, but wrapped in warm blankets beside Patrick on the wagon seat, Rebecca felt no cold. They talked and laughed, making plans for the future, dreaming out loud about the life they would build together. Sarah had prepared the house for their arrival, adding little touches to make Rebecca feel welcome. She had moved her own things to a smaller bedroom, giving Patrick and Rebecca the larger room that had been his. That first night in their marriage bed, Patrick was gentle and patient, making sure Rebecca felt cherished and safe. Their lovemaking was tender and sweet, a physical expression of the emotional connection they had built. Life on the ranch proved to be everything Rebecca had hoped for, and nothing she had expected. The work was hard, much harder than sewing in Sacramento, but it was satisfying in a way her old life had never been. Patrick taught her about the cattle, about managing the land, about the 1,000 small tasks that kept a ranch running. She proved to be a quick learner, and Patrick often commented on how natural she seemed in this new role. Sarah became the sister Rebecca had never had. They worked together in the kitchen and garden, shared secrets and dreams, and supported each other through the challenges of ranch life. Sarah confessed that she had hoped from the moment she met Rebecca that her brother would fall in love, and seeing them together made her happier than she could express. The first year of marriage brought changes and growth for everyone. Patrick expanded the herd with money he had been saving, and Rebecca helped him manage the books and plan for the future. She discovered a talent for breeding chickens, developing a flock that produced exceptional eggs that they sold in town. Sarah met a young man from Reading, a schoolteacher named Thomas who courted her properly and won both Patrick's and Rebecca's approval. On their first anniversary, Patrick surprised Rebecca with a gift. He had been working on it in secret for months, carving and sanding in the barn when she thought he was doing other work. It was a rocking chair, beautifully made from oak, with their initials carved into the back along with their wedding date. "For when we have children," he said, his eyes soft. "I want them to grow up in a house full of love, to have everything we did not." Rebecca traced the carved letters with her fingers, overwhelmed with emotion. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "I am far from perfect," Patrick said, pulling her into his arms. "But I am yours and you are mine, and that is all that matters." 2 months later, Rebecca realized she was pregnant. The news filled the ranch house with excitement. Sarah immediately began making baby clothes, while Patrick started building a cradle with the same care he had put into the rocking chair. Rebecca experienced the normal discomforts of pregnancy, but she had never felt happier or more complete. Their son was born in the spring of 1878, arriving with the new calves and the first flowers in Sarah's garden. They named him Samuel Patrick Irving, and from the moment Rebecca held him, She understood the fierce protective love a parent should feel. This child would know nothing but love and security, she vowed. He would never doubt his worth or his place in the world. Patrick was a devoted father, involved in every aspect of Samuel's care despite the demands of the ranch. He would rock the baby for hours, singing old songs his mother had taught him, and Rebecca would watch them together and feel her heart swell with love. Sarah married Thomas the following summer, but she and her husband built a house just a mile down the road from the ranch. She could not bear to be far from her brother and the nephew she adored. The two households became one extended family, sharing meals and work and celebrations. Rebecca's second pregnancy came when Samuel was 2 years old. This time she carried a daughter, born in the winter of 1880. They named her Rose after Patrick's mother, and she had Rebecca's blonde hair and Patrick's dark eyes. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her and show her his treasures. The ranch continued to prosper. Patrick's hard work and Rebecca's business sense proved to be a powerful combination. They expanded their land holdings, bought more cattle, and developed a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. But despite their growing success, they never lost sight of what truly mattered, each other and the family they were building. When Samuel was 5 and Rose was 3, Patrick built an addition onto the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Rebecca had learned she was pregnant again, and while the house could have accommodated 1 more child, Patrick wanted room to grow. "How many children are we planning to have?" Rebecca teased him as she watched the construction. Patrick grinned, wrapping his arms around her expanding waist. "As many as you are willing to give me. I love our family, Rebecca. I love the noise and chaos and love. I never want it to end." Their third child, another boy they named William after Rebecca's father, arrived that fall. Rebecca had made her peace with her father's memory, choosing to remember the man he had tried to be at the end, rather than the one who had hurt her throughout her childhood. Little William was a happy, easy baby who rarely cried and seemed content just to be held and loved. The years passed in a blur of activity and joy. Rebecca sometimes thought back to that cold winter day when her wagon wheel broke, and she marveled at how one moment of misfortune had led to such overwhelming blessing. If the wheel had not broken, if Patrick had not come along when he did, she would have missed all of this, the love, the family, the life she had built. Samuel grew into a thoughtful, serious boy who loved the ranch and showed every sign of following in his father's footsteps. Rose was spirited and clever, always asking questions and exploring. Young William was quieter, content to follow his siblings and observe the world with wise eyes. When Samuel turned 7, Patrick began teaching him the ranching business in earnest. Rebecca watched father and son work together and saw the bond between them, built on respect and love and shared purpose. It was everything she had hoped for her children. Sarah and Thomas had children of their own, 3 daughters who were playmates and friends to Rebecca's children. The two families celebrated holidays and birthdays together, creating traditions that Rebecca knew would last for generations. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Patrick and Rebecca took a rare day away from the ranch. They rode out to the spot where they had first met, where her wagon had broken down all those years ago. The trail looked different in summer, green and lush instead of frozen and forbidding, but Rebecca could still picture it as it had been. "You ever regret it?" Patrick asked, dismounting to help her down from her horse. "Giving up your old life, staying here with me?" Rebecca looked at him, this man who had given her everything, and smiled. "Not for a single moment. That life was not really living. This, what we have built together, this is real." "You saved me that day, Patrick. not just from the cold, but from a life of loneliness and emptiness. "You saved me too," Patrick said softly, pulling her close. "I was going through the motions, working myself into an early grave with nothing but duty to drive me forward. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to build something lasting. You gave me love." They stood there together, two people who had found each other against all odds, and Rebecca felt the rightness of it settle over her like a blessing. Whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. Whatever joys awaited, they would share them. The ranch continued to thrive through the 1880s. Patrick proved to be not just a skilled rancher but a wise businessman, adapting to changes in the market and expanding their operations carefully. Rebecca managed the household and helped with the books, her careful records and attention to detail helping them avoid the pitfalls that claimed many ranchers. Their children grew and flourished. Samuel at 12 was already taller than his mother, with his father's steady demeanor and natural authority. Rose at 10 was beginning to show an interest in teaching, spending hours with her Aunt Sarah learning lessons. William at 7 was proving to have a gift with animals, able to calm even the most skittish horse or nervous cow. Rebecca gave birth to one more child when she was 32, a daughter they named Grace. She was their last baby, and Rebecca treasured every moment of her infancy, knowing it was the final time she would experience these precious early months. Patrick doted on his youngest daughter, carrying her everywhere and making her laugh with silly faces and songs. As the children grew older, the house became a hub of activity. Samuel brought friends home from town, boys interested in ranching who looked up to Patrick. Rose organized readings and small social gatherings for the local girls. William collected every stray and injured animal he found, nursing them back to health with patient dedication. Grace followed her older siblings everywhere, determined to keep up despite her small size. Patrick's relationship with each child was unique and special. He taught Samuel responsibility and leadership, encouraging him to make decisions and learn from mistakes. With Rose, he was gentle and supportive, taking her ideas seriously and helping her pursue her educational interests. William brought out his patient side, as they spent hours together working with the animals. And Grace, his baby, made him laugh and reminded him to find joy in simple things. Rebecca watched her husband with their children and fell in love with him all over again. The way he listened to them, really listened, and made each one feel valued and important, it was everything she had missed in her own childhood. Their home was full of laughter and warmth, exactly what she had dreamed of creating. The ranch became known throughout the region not just for quality cattle, but for the family that ran it. People spoke of the Irvings with respect, noting how they treated their workers fairly, helped neighbors in need, and raised their children to be kind and capable. Patrick and Rebecca had built more than a successful business. They had built a legacy. When Samuel turned 16, Patrick made him a full partner in the ranch operations. It was earlier than most fathers would have done, but Patrick trusted his son's judgment and wanted him to understand the weight of responsibility. Samuel rose to the challenge, working alongside his father with dedication and showing sound judgment beyond his years. Rose finished her schooling in Reading and announced her intention to become a teacher. Rebecca supported her fully, though it meant her daughter would spend weekdays in town during the school term. Patrick struggled more with letting her go, but he ultimately recognized that Rose needed to follow her own path. The years brought changes beyond the Irving family. Reading grew from a small town into a more established community. The railroad expanded, bringing new opportunities and challenges. Patrick adapted, finding new markets for their cattle and building relationships with buyers throughout California. Through it all, Rebecca and Patrick's love remained constant. They still took evening walks together when weather permitted, still shared private jokes and meaningful glances across crowded rooms. Their physical relationship remained passionate and tender, a source of connection and joy. They had grown together rather than apart, their individual strengths complementing each other perfectly. On their 20th anniversary, their children surprised them with a party. Sarah and Thomas helped organize it, inviting friends and neighbors from throughout the region. The house and barn were decorated with flowers and ribbons, and tables groaned under the weight of food brought by grateful friends. As Rebecca stood beside Patrick, accepting congratulations and good wishes, she looked around at the life they had built. Their 4 children, healthy and happy and loved. Their extended family, Sarah and Thomas and their children. The ranch, prosperous and thriving. The community that had embraced them. It was more than she had ever imagined possible. Late in the evening, after most guests had gone home, Patrick pulled Rebecca aside. They walked out to the spot where the new barn stood, built 5 years earlier to accommodate their expanded herd. 20 years, Patrick said, his arm around her waist. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean, Rebecca said, leaning into him. Sometimes I still feel like that frightened woman with the broken wagon, and sometimes it feels like I have always been here, like this was always meant to be my life. Patrick turned to face her, his hands cupping her face gently. The moonlight silvered his hair, now touched with gray at the temples, and highlighted the lines around his eyes, marks of years spent squinting into the sun. He was no longer the young cowboy who had stopped to help a stranded woman, but Rebecca loved this older, weathered version even more. I have never told you properly what you mean to me, Patrick said, his voice rough with emotion. I am not good with words, never have been. But you need to know that you are everything to me. Every good thing in my life comes back to you, to that moment when I decided to stop and help. It was the best decision I ever made. I love you, Rebecca whispered, tears gathering in her eyes, more than I can express. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You showed me what love really means. They kissed then, a kiss full of 20 years of shared life, of passion and tenderness and deep, abiding love. When they finally pulled apart, they stood together looking out over the ranch, their kingdom built on hard work and devotion. The years continued to pass. Samuel married at 21, bringing home a sweet young woman named Catherine who fit into the family perfectly. They built a house on the ranch land, and Samuel began taking on more of the day-to-day operations, allowing Patrick to step back slightly. Patrick and Rebecca's first grandchild, a boy named Patrick after his grandfather, was born when they were 48. Rose married her fellow teacher, a kind man from Sacramento who understood her passion for education. They settled in Redding, where Rose became known as one of the finest teachers in the region. She and her husband had 2 children, both of whom showed early signs of their mother's quick mind. William, true to his childhood nature, became a veterinarian. He studied in Sacramento, then returned to Redding to set up practice. His gift with animals made him invaluable to the ranching community, and he was never short of work. He married later than his siblings, at 27, to a rancher's daughter who shared his love of animals. Grace, their youngest, was the most adventurous of their children. She traveled to San Francisco, worked as a journalist, and sent long letters home describing her exciting life. But she always came back to the ranch for important occasions, and Rebecca knew that no matter how far she roamed, part of her heart would always belong to the place she had grown up. Patrick and Rebecca aged gracefully into their 50s and 60s. They remained active in ranch operations, though Samuel had truly taken over most of the work. They spent more time with their growing brood of grandchildren, passing on stories and wisdom and unconditional love. On quiet evenings, they would sit together on the porch in the rocking chairs Patrick had made, Rebecca in the anniversary chair and Patrick in a matching one he had built years later. They would watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors and talk about their day, their children, their memories. "You remember," Rebecca said one evening when they were both 65, "when you said you wanted to fix me. That day you fixed my wagon wheel." Patrick smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I remember. I was terrified you would think me too forward." "I did not need fixing," Rebecca said softly. "I needed loving. I needed someone to show me what I was worth, to give me a place to belong. You did that." "You did not fix me, you freed me." "We freed each other," Patrick corrected gently. "I was just as lost as you were, just in a different way. We found each other at exactly the right moment and we built something beautiful together." Rebecca reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "I would not change a single thing. Not one moment, not one decision. It has all been perfect." "Not perfect," Patrick said with a slight smile. "We have had our share of struggles and sorrows. But it has been real, and it has been ours, and that is better than perfect." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge. Around them, the ranch settled into its nighttime rhythms. In the main house, Samuel and Catherine were putting their children to bed. In the newer barn, cattle lowed softly. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate. This was the life they had built together, born from a chance meeting on a frozen road. A broken wagon wheel had led to a mended heart, to a love story that spanned decades and generations. Rebecca thought about the woman she had been, desperate and alone on that winter day, and felt nothing but gratitude for every step that had brought her to this moment. Patrick squeezed her hand gently. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Rebecca said simply. "And how grateful I am." "Me too," Patrick said, his voice soft in the gathering dark. "Every single day I am grateful for you." They sat together as night fell completely, two people who had found their way home to each other and never looked back. The ranch around them stood as testimony to their love and hard work, and their children and grandchildren carried forward the legacy they had begun. It was more than either of them had dreamed possible, and yet it felt exactly right. As Rebecca rested her head on Patrick's shoulder, watching the stars multiply across the vast sky, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The broken wagon wheel had been a blessing in disguise, a twist of fate that had brought her the greatest gift of all, a love that would last a lifetime and beyond. The years grew gentler for Patrick and Rebecca as they entered their 70s. They spent their days in quiet contentment, surrounded by the family they had created. Samuel ran the ranch with the same dedication Patrick had shown, and it continued to thrive. Their grandchildren grew up hearing stories of how their grandparents had met, the tale of the broken wagon wheel becoming family legend. When Patrick was 74, he fell ill with pneumonia during a harsh winter. Rebecca nursed him through it with the same fierce determination she had brought to every challenge in their life together. He recovered, though more slowly than either of them liked, and the illness left him frailer than before. "I am not ready to leave you yet," he told Rebecca one night as they prepared for bed. "We still have more time together. I can feel it." Rebecca kissed his forehead gently. "Then we will take every moment we are given and make the most of it." And they did. For 5 more years, they enjoyed each other and their family. They celebrated Samuel and Catherine's silver anniversary, welcomed their 12th grandchild, and saw Grace finally settle down with a newspaperman from San Francisco. They attended church socials and family dinners, held great-grandchildren on their laps, and continued their tradition of evening talks on the porch. Patrick passed quietly in his sleep at 79, with Rebecca beside him as she had been for nearly 50 years. His heart simply stopped, worn out from a life fully lived and full of love. Rebecca woke to find him gone, and though her grief was deep, she took comfort in knowing he had died peacefully, surrounded by everything he had built and everyone he had loved. The funeral brought together the entire community. The church was packed with ranchers and townspeople, with friends and family who had been touched by Patrick's quiet kindness and unwavering integrity. Samuel delivered the eulogy, his voice breaking as he spoke of his father's legacy. Rebecca stood beside her children at the graveside, holding Grace's hand on one side and William's on the other, and said goodbye to the man who had given her everything. But even in her grief, she felt his presence, felt the love that had sustained them through decades and would continue to sustain her for whatever time she had left. She lived for 7 more years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She spent her days telling stories, passing on recipes and wisdom, and making sure everyone knew how much they were loved. She spoke often of Patrick, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who had not known him well. On a warm spring morning in 1927, at the age of 82, Rebecca Palmer Irving passed peacefully in her sleep. She was laid to rest beside Patrick in the Redding Cemetery, their matching headstones testament to a life built together and a love that had never wavered. Their children gathered at the ranch after the funeral, walking the land their parents had worked and loved. Samuel stood in the spot where his father had first encountered his mother all those years ago, that place where a broken wagon wheel had changed everything. "They built something remarkable," Catherine said softly, slipping her hand into Samuel's. "Not just the ranch, but a legacy of love." Samuel nodded, looking out over the prosperous land, the thriving cattle, the next generation of Irvings already learning the work. "They showed us what was possible when 2 people truly commit to each other and to building a life together. Everything we have, everything we are, comes from that moment when Dad stopped to help a stranger on a frozen road." The Irving Ranch continued to operate for generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation Patrick and Rebecca had laid. The tale of how they met became family lore, told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the greatest blessings. In town, older residents would speak of the Irvings with warm respect, remembering Patrick's steady presence and Rebecca's kind heart. The love story of the cowboy who fixed more than just a wagon wheel became legend, an example of how 2 broken people could heal each other and create something beautiful together. The original rocking chair Patrick had carved, with their initials and wedding date, was preserved and passed down through the family. Each generation that used it to rock their babies understood they were part of something larger than themselves, part of a love story that had begun in winter's cold and bloomed into a lifetime of warmth. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, Patrick and Rebecca were together again, their souls reunited as their hearts had been since that fateful December day in 1876, when a broken wagon wheel brought them together and changed everything.